This is a virtual roundtable discussion. I apologize. Would have much rather been happier to do this in person, but since I'm on quarantine, I can't leave my property. I wish hopefully with the November general election coming up very quickly, we get a chance to see each other in person again to talk about some of the things that I know you've all been extremely busy with. You've got the new vote by mail regime here in Illinois. So I do appreciate you taking an hour out of your day to speak with me, also members of the media who are on this call, and one of the EAC commissioners. As the first of many roundtables that I hope to host this fall with election administrators, I'm really happy, again, to be with my own county clerks that I represent in Congress. Today, we've gathered federal, state, and local officials to learn about the challenges and the obstacles facing election administrators. As the ranking member of the House Administration Committee, which has broad oversight over federal elections, I've said time and time again that we in Congress and the federal government must look to our state and local election officials for guidance on election policy. Unfortunately, many of my colleagues in the majority in Washington have pushed for elections to be run from Washington, D.C. instead of central and southwestern Illinois. As we've seen with the passage of H.R. 1 and the Speaker's attempts to use the coronavirus as an excuse to force states to adopt expanded vote by mail, certain polling place restrictions, and even legalized ballot harvesting. As a clear alternative, last month I introduced the EASE Act, the Emergency Assistance for Safe Elections Act, to provide assistance without dozens of costly mandates to help states and local election officials administer elections in November. The EASE Act provides $200 million to help states operate safe places for people to vote in person, since a recent poll found that 59% of Americans still prefer to vote in person. This also includes $100 million for a new student loan repayment program to help younger poll workers get recruited. The average age of our poll workers is above 65 years old. That is something we have to encourage young workers to get engaged on, and that means working election days. And we also included $100 million to help our states clean their voter rolls. One specific need I've heard from election officials really, again, is the need to recruit more poll workers. We know the average age of 65 and above puts many of our current poll workers in the most vulnerable population for COVID-19 symptoms. So the nation right now is seeing a drastic drop in those willing to serve at the polls on election day. This EASE Act, again, would help in this effort by directing the EAC to establish a program that would help pay student loan debt for poll workers. I know that the EAC has a national recruiting strategy, and I applaud those efforts. I'm also interested in hearing from everyone on our panel as to what more can be done at the federal level to recruit able and willing poll workers. I hope that today we can provide a forum for you all. As our local election administrators, we want to give you a sense in the federal government of what you need to safely and securely administer an election in the midst of a pandemic, although I know some on this call already have. And with that, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Don Palmer, at the Election Assistance Commission for his brief opening remarks.
Thank you, Congressman Davis. It's a pleasure to be part of this. I am Don Palmer I'm the Vice Chair of the Election Assistance Commission, and it's great to be part of this roundtable, to discuss preparations for elections in this presidential election year. Again, thank you for inviting me to be part of the discussion. I'm eager to hear about the preparations thus far for November. This has really been a year of adjustment for voters, and we've really witnessed at DAC the persistent efforts of local and state election officials sort of overcome these challenges. We're really humbled by what we see at the EAC. We've held a series of meetings on the lessons learned from the primary season, and there have been some lessons and how you conduct an election in a COVID environment. And those lessons are now being shared as best practices across the country. One of the things that we are concerned with is there is a crisis in the country with the number of poll workers available to work the polls. We are in full promotion mode at the EAC to highlight the poll worker shortage in certain areas of the country. The EAC is highlighting the National Poll Worker Recruitment Day on September 1st, and we're trying to help localities ensure that polling place closures are held to a minimum and that there is a safe and secure option for the American people to vote on Election Day. So I've served as an election official at the state level in Florida and Virginia, working closely with our local election officials, and now I'm at the EAC. Elections are administered at the local level, and the vast majority of appropriations for elections are generated at the local level. That money is spent on county or city election offices, election workers, employees, polling places, poll workers, and all those important IT and cyber functions that you read about. It is our hope that the federal funds that have been appropriated, and it's been over $1 billion since 2018, that this will help localities give them more flexibility in preparation and security and in response to the COVID environment. For example, the EAC recently distributed $400 million in CARES Act funds, and we're really assisting the states in sort of using that into preparing for the 2020 election and making sure our polling places are secure and safe. There was also $425 million in new HAVA funds in early 2020, and that is being spent by states to secure the cyber functions and the election administration as we approach we end the primary season and we enter the general election. With that, I'm going to turn it over. I look forward to hearing from the local election officials on how things are going in Illinois in preparation for 2020. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Palmer. Just very quickly, again, I will ask if your name is not displayed, if you can please rename yourself so that your name is displayed. And I'll ask very quickly, if your name is displayed as iPhone, I'm gonna unmute your line and ask that you quickly just let us know who you are. iPhone. Okay. If you're logged in as your name is owner, if you could please unmute your line and just let us know who you are so we can accurately display. Your line's unmuted. You can tell us your name, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Cole Lauterbach with thecentersquare.com. Sorry about that. I was trying to change it, but it's not letting me change it in meeting. Apologies.
No problem. Thank you. Okay. And then real quickly, the phone numbers. If your phone number is 618-849-8817, if you could please hit *6 and just quickly tell us your name. Okay. 217-424-1306. If that's your phone number, you hit *6, that should unmute your line and you can tell us your name. Lastly, 309-688-3131. All right. Got most folks at this point, just a couple left. Okay. So Mr. Davis, I believe, has a series of questions for the county clerks to discuss, as well as himself, Mr. Palmer, and others participating in the call that he's going to work through. For those, I will, as he calls on you, I will unmute your line for you, and then you should be able to speak and answer freely. So Mr. Davis, if you're ready, I think we're ready on this end. Oh, unmute real quick.
Thank you. Hey, I noticed in the chat room, you need to go in there. Some of our county clerks have called in. That's their numbers. So
Perfect.
free to
Yep,
go
I'll
in
open those up
and
now.
see them. Pam, Dana, thank you guys. Sorry about the technical difficulties, but thank you all again for being here. And this is a chance for us to hear directly from our local election officials. Hearings that we've had, although they've been limited in Washington, D.C., one thing that we've tried to do in the minority on House administration is to really hear from election administrators. So today, again, is the first of our roundtables. And really, Commissioner Palmer brought up a major issue that needs to be addressed here. He mentioned the EAC has distributed hundreds of millions of dollars that we appropriated in the CARES Act to our local election officials. And I want to hear from those who would like to give their opinion or their testimony today from each of the county clerks on the line. Please, if you would, if you can, go in and raise your hand as part of the chat feature, and we will call on you. If you don't raise your hand, I'm happy to still call on you if I see your name on the screen and I know you're a county clerk. So if you'd like to give your testimony as to how you and your county, how your election administrators have spent those dollars and what else you need, I'm going to start with Sangamon County Clerk Don Gray. If you'd like to answer that question and give us an indication of where those dollars have been spent in your local jurisdiction. So Don Gray, please go ahead.
Thank you, Congressman. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really happy to see that you're doing really well. And more importantly, I'm really grateful for this opportunity to continue to discuss elections operations at the local level. We get the perspective of us that are tasked with the implementation of the election, because we have a lot to offer. There's often lots of theoretical based proposals that are put place, but we're on the ground actually making this happen, working hard to provide for a November 3rd general election that is secure, that is accountable, that's transparent, and that is healthy, regardless of the form in which voters choose to cast ballots. We're working hard to make sure that it's going to be a great election, one that we all can be very proud of, vis-a-vis if that be voting by mail, utilizing the early vote window, or voting on election day. All of our attention is on how we can provide that best, how we can afford to provide for a good election with the increased services in which are asked upon us, and that in the unique environment of this COVID-19 pandemic, that people are safe and healthy throughout. And specific to your question on the funding side, I'm really encouraged about the collaborative effort from the federal government to the state government to the local level. We've all dug deep to look at what additional things we need to make in investments from the uniqueness of this particular cycle, how we can prudently spend dollars to effectively accomplish the goals, and invest in things that make sense, that give confidence to the system. And really the primary focus, I think, where expense has really increased is on the vote by mail side. There is certainly an appetite for individuals looking at that option, especially in very targeted ranges. We're noticing here in Sangamon County a much older population that is interested in voting by mail. And that's increasing our numbers. And that comes with a lot of auxiliary costs with it. Certainly, the vote by mail process is very paper heavy. You have to application into the process. In Illinois, they've mandated applications be sent to a certain segment that have successfully gone out before August 1st. We're seeing increased amount of individuals that are taking advantage of that application and registering in earlier to be able to receive their ballot by mail. We know more vote by mail packets are going to need to be printed, prepared, and ready to be released. We know there's going to be an increased cost in postage. All of those are weighing upon kind of the tight dollars of what we have here at the local levels, who are working very tight in the margins, as it was in advance of the uniqueness of this situation. Now when we get closer to when ballots are released and sent by mail, that's a much more substantial packet of information that goes out with the ballot, etc. There's not just one unique ballot for each jurisdiction. We can potentially have hundreds of different ballots depending upon where you are registered to vote. We have to prepare and print more. So that's all kind of weighing on, our expense. Really a really big part of the expense side is that, successful, effective elections are performed by people. It takes people to have a successful election concluded appropriately and done right. And the validation of vote by mail, it takes a lot more people on hand to do that. And when we're expecting to have a much higher quantity of folks voting by mail, we need more people in order to validate and tabulate and be prepared to be able to report our results when polls close on election day. To give a little perspective, in Sangamon County prior to this cycle, we would process internal vote by mail at about 8.5% at our greatest amount of ballots that's ever been cast by mail. We're anticipating, a whole lot more than that. We've already received applications to vote by mail that are double the amount than what we've cast in our most busy ever. We've utilized one team of election judges to process those ballots internally before for us. Now we're making plans to have 5 teams of 3, 15 people a day that are processing these returned ballots. We think it could be at that substantial level. And certainly that's the challenge for us, is to find individuals that have the flexibility within their schedule to be trained, properly trained and prepared and available to work for us. So that's where the expense is coming. I'm grateful to the CARES Act. I'm grateful to the state's additional funding they help provide in postage. It's really helping go a long way to ensure that we're going to provide for a really great election. I'm also encouraging, legislators to, really take under advisement the EASE Act. The incentives that you're providing are critical to the recruitment of election personnel on election day. This isn't all just vote by mail. We are going to have early vote, and there is going to be an election day. And all of those elements have to be ready, and we have to have people to perform those elections. These incentives that you're providing to encourage people to serve is going to be a critical part for us in recruitment. And I'm grateful for that, and I encourage this passage, and I hope that we see it.
Well, great. Hey, thank you, Don. And I appreciate your service too as one of our appointees to the Election Assistance Commission Advisory Board. Hopefully you keep Palmer and the crew in line. So thanks for doing that, my friend. I want to now turn it over to my county clerk, Mike Genesi from Christian County. Give us an idea of what I can expect since I vote here, and what the voters in Christian County can expect, how you're spending that CARES Act money, Mike. And feel free, if you want to jump on the video, they'll unvideo you, or if you're just on the phone, go ahead. Mike, you there?
Make sure you unmute yourself. You should be able to unmute yourself. There we go.
I'm speaking through the phone. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now, Mike.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'd like to thank Congressman Davis, of course, for the opportunity to have this forum with the other county clerks and everyone else with regards to our election situation here coming up in November. Of course, I would like to piggyback my remarks off of Clerk Don Gray, that this election season is going to be a unique one for all of us, and the assistance that's being provided through federal and state resources is invaluable for our ability to complete this election process successful. When it comes to the current status of vote by mail, we have sent out, in my jurisdiction, for example, again, approximately 21,500 postcards that are the vote by mail request applications. I don't know if Congressman Davis has received one, but he should have had one at least sent to him in the mail, along with all other registered voters in the county. That was the choice that I made for this particular election. We've received quite a few back. In fact, we have received now, since our initial mailing, approximately 700 or so applications back requesting ballots for the upcoming election. Unfortunately, I don't have a comparison to a prior year, so I really don't know how that plays compared to that, although I would say my overall response is rather significant compared to the previous elections. So the response is good. The overall sentiment of the public, I would honestly say, is not at a 100% positive, not a 100% positive response to what's been going on. I understand that people have concerns over vote by mail and the heightened awareness of the vote by mail process. However, I try to explain to everybody who questions it that the vote by mail process in Illinois has been here for many years, and the process itself has not changed. It's just we're trying to promote the idea a little bit more than it has in the past. So with regards to vote by mail, yes, everything's working out well. The funding, of course, from the state and federal sources, like I said, very helpful. As mentioned before, the postage grant is very much needed for situations like this with our increased mailings that are going to be going out compared to prior years. We're also using some of the HAVA funds for cybersecurity related increases in spending, and also we're looking at additional resources for the upcoming polling place requirements that might involve some additional COVID-19 related cleanings and or other preparations for the upcoming physical locations. Early voting, when that starts, I believe everything will be about the same. We'll, I'm sure, have an increase in overall traffic into the courthouse. In Christian County, we're a small jurisdiction, so the courthouse is the only early voting site, but we should be able to handle the traffic here. We will have additional machine, I believe, on site for doing the early vote counts compared to, again, previous elections, but that can be accommodated for through the increase in HAVA funds availability. The election day situation, as described, we are looking at, in Christian County, 23 physical locations for polling places, and my jurisdiction was a jurisdiction that was affected back in March negatively by the situation where I had the day before the primary, all election judges in one particular polling place had called in and indicated that they would not be able to serve on election day. I did my best to reach out to anybody that would be able to serve and was unable to accomplish that feat, and therefore I was out at that polling place 10:30 p.m. the night before, putting a sign on the door indicating that the polling place would be closed on election day and that election services for that particular polling place would be accomplished at the county courthouse. There was some inconvenience there for quite a few people, which of course I heard about very directly on election day.
Did I?
But at the, go ahead.
So did I.
Yes, yes. As a matter of fact, I'm not surprised. But it's a judgment call. I could not guarantee any other polling place would be open based on what was happening there. So the logistics were either pick a local, more local polling place to accomplish the feat, or go ahead and move it to the county courthouse where I knew we would be open and be able to make the services happen guaranteed. So again, yes, there was frustration on the part of some voters, and I did my best to take care of the situations, and I believe we came through it as best as we could. However, it has prompted other county clerks to circulate ideas with regards to the upcoming election as to how to handle those situations and be prepared for them well ahead of time with the necessary potential legal documents to make that transition happen more seamlessly if necessary. We're also looking at the additional situations required to process voters that are within nursing homes and other facilities that might be closed on election day or prior to election day for any type of visitors. There are also potential legal documents available for us to verify that we can process voters within those facilities accurately and legally and make sure that all of those residents have the ability to vote as well. But again, some of that is more of an increased awareness, but it's also more of an increased burden on us where the funding from the HAVA funds should be able to help us with some additional staffing as well. Again, as Clerk Don Gray mentioned, the signature verification judges, we normally have a pair of those. We'll be looking to increase with additional signature verification judges to be able to process more ballots accurately and within the scheduled timeframes based on the change to the law here in Illinois. And we possibly would need some other additional equipment, but again, as we get closer to that time, we'll be looking to see what we need. We obviously want to be prudent on what we're spending the money on and fiscally responsible. So with that being said, again, I want to thank Congressman Davis for having this forum, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for coming out to DC and being one of our witnesses too. I do want to say that that call you had to make during the primary was a tough call, but it was the right one. And I can personally attest you did everything you could to make sure every single person in that precinct at that late time had a chance to cast their vote. Thanks for doing that, my friend. I'm going to turn it over now to Kathy Michael from McLean County. Kathy, you want to pop on video if you're there or just on the phone? We'll unmute you.
Yep, you should be able to unmute your line. There we go.
There you go, Kathy. Is your phone on mute, Kathy?
Her line's unmuted.
Yeah.
Sure why she's not.
Is the phone still on mute? I do that often.
Okay, she just remuted herself. Let's see. Kathy, can you hear us? Not sure why she's.
Well, we can work on the technical difficulties. Any other county clerks want to chime in? Go ahead and unmute yourself and let us know if there's anything you want to add to what Don Gray and Mike Genesi mentioned for all of the viewers today. All right, let me turn it over to Don Palmer real quick before I come back to me and ask. I want to hear from the State Board of Elections too. But Mr. Palmer, any questions you have for the county clerks about the HAVA funds and other funds that have been distributed based upon their responses? I think Don's still muted.
There we go.
There you go.
What was the question, Congressman?
Yeah, do you have any questions of the county clerks who talked about the HAVA funds that your commission has distributed based upon the responses they've had? Is there any follow-up you'd like to do since we got you here?
Well, I think that, whenever I get a chance to talk with, local administrators, it's the same conversation I had when I was at the state. We are less than 90 days to the general election. And the question really is there anything more that we can do helping recruit poll workers or, just sort of educating the American people? I always ask, what can we provide to local administrators at this point as we get closer and closer to Election Day?
Well, we appreciate that greatly. And do we have I know Kathy Michael wanted to say a few words. Kathy, can you unmute yourself and chat now? Nick, please unmute Kathy and see if we can get her this time.
Yep, she's unmuted. I just chatted her as well to see.
Okay. Check your phone, Kath, and then you're ready to roll. All right. Still got some technical difficulties. Okay. Well, I noticed we have some folks from the State Board of Elections. Let's not underestimate what the folks at the State Board of Elections do on a regular basis to make sure that we have election processes go off without a hitch. I know last election cycle, actually in 2016, there was an attempted cybersecurity hack on the voter registration system at the State Board of Elections. The folks at the State Board did a great job in turning that attack back and making sure that the data that could have been exposed was limited, very limited. We appreciate the job that each and every person that works at that state agency does. And I know we have Angela Ryan and Matt Dietrich here with us. And really my question for either of you, or even both of you, if you guys would both like to respond, what's been the biggest struggle for the State Board of Elections at this time? And what else do you think we can do at the federal level to be helpful with the data that you keep? Just so everybody knows, I've been really pushing to ensure that the voter registration systems in this country that are actually in our state handled by the State Board of Elections as a state clearinghouse, that those systems don't have to follow the same guidelines and tests that our voting machines do. I've been calling for any vendor who sells systems for e-poll books, voter registration systems, to follow the same VVSG guidelines that our election machines have to follow. If that's where the cybersecurity threat was in my home state, I want to make sure that we're ready for any future cybersecurity threats on systems like that. And as we automate, as we want to reduce the time that people have to wait to vote, we're going to go toward more e-poll books. And that's something that I think we have to address nowadays. But I do want to turn it over to Matt and Angela. You guys figure out who you want to respond and give us your biggest challenges.
Congressman, I can probably start. I'm the public information officer here at the State Board of Elections, and I think my biggest challenge right now pertains to messaging, specifically to vote by mail, getting the word out to the voters that voting by mail is safe and secure, as we've already heard from a couple of the clerks, from Don Gray and Clerk Genese, but also emphatically, practically begging voters, if you have an inkling that you're going to vote by mail, if you are in any way inclined to voting by mail, get that application in now. And when you get that ballot back, vote it as quickly as you can. Send it back as quickly as you possibly can to keep a smooth workflow for your local election authority, and also because we do not want to create an undue burden on the Postal Service. I'm getting a lot of questions now about, from the media, about can the Postal Service handle this? Are you concerned about backlogs and ballots not being delivered? And my message is we've had a letter that's gotten some publicity from the General Counsel of the Postal Service that basically says, encourage voters to get those ballots into the mail as soon as they possibly can, hopefully 15 days before the election or earlier. So this is one of my biggest challenges, that it is to get that through to voters, that, you know, not only is voting by mail available to you, but that it's safe and secure, but also that it is something that you want to do quickly. One of the things that you'll see on our social media accounts coming up over the next week or so is hashtag #PlanYourVoteIL. We really want to encourage people to plan their voting. We know that in past years, even in big presidential elections, people tend to not think about it until a few days before the election. We already know that most of the early voting gets done in those days immediately preceding the election. And then, of course, we all know about Election Day and the potential for congestion and that sort of thing. So we really want to emphasize to voters that we are in a unique situation this year with the pandemic. Plan your vote. Think about it now. If you're inclined to vote by mail, get that application back right now, today, as soon as you possibly can. And then when you receive your ballot, mark it and mail it in as soon as you're comfortable doing so. We would encourage people to do that a couple of weeks ahead of the election. And the other thing is, if you are, you really, really want to vote in person, which is important to a lot of people, think about voting early. Think about voting early in person as early as you possibly can at an off-peak time where you're less likely to face congestion at an early voting site. And again, and we're stressing that the fact that schools are available to every election authority now to use as polling places. We are I'm trying to explain to just the general public that that's a really big deal for election day voting, because schools are ideal polling places. Obviously, they're ADA compliant. We have new rules that allow for curbside voting under the new election bill. Schools are very well set up for that. So I'm explaining that, why that's such a big deal. The fact that schools are closed means a greater pool of recruits as possible election judges, including, in some cases, 16-year-olds on election day. So I think my biggest challenge is the messaging. So we're trying to do that by a combination of I've done had a lot of news media interest in this, been doing a lot of interviews. You will see press releases that will come from me in the near future, encouraging using this hashtag #PlanYourVoteIL, and that'll be an effort on my part just to generate some more media attention to get the word out. You'll also, we're working on an ad campaign with coaches at 7 universities: University of Illinois, SIU, Northern Illinois, Bradley, Loyola, Northwestern. I think that's only 6 of them, and I don't know who I'm leaving out, but Illinois State, where they are creating ad spots, 30-second and 15-second spots with coaches, prominent coaches from those schools. Lovie Smith from the University of Illinois, Coach Fitzgerald at Northwestern are 2 that I know of who are going to be involved in this. We've already been working on what the messaging will be, but it's basically going to be, hey, plan your vote, do it early, vote by mail if you're concerned about coronavirus. Otherwise, if you're going to vote in person, consider using vote by mail. Those will be important because those schools have huge social media and digital presence, and they can get that message out onto social media at far greater than I can do it here just on my social media accounts, or even on some of your local election authorities' media accounts. I'm also going to be in a conference next Monday with the Illinois Emergency Management Agency. They, of course, have handled general messaging relating to coronavirus in general. I would like to see us, if possible, work through them to do some broadcast advertising with these same themes. And in general, what we're trying to do is get all the voters to come to our website first, because it's an easy one to remember, elections.il.gov. That's where they can apply for their vote by mail ballot. That's where they can find out where their early voting locations are. They can check if they're registered, all of that stuff. We also have my meeting with IEMA is more or less an effort to get a shortcut through another plan that we are waiting on an invitation for bids on a couple of ad campaigns. One would be strictly for voting by mail. The other would be to promote the Illinois State Board of Elections and our website as the voters' trusted source for election information. That's an effort to combat misinformation on social media. I'm waiting to hear when that goes live in the state's procurement system. My end of the paperwork has been done for a while, so we've just been waiting on that. But in the meantime, I'll be talking with IEMA about possibly just doing an agreement through them, through their existing advertising channels, to get that message out by broadcast media, and hopefully social media as well. So, you know, like I said, that's my biggest challenge here, and our biggest challenge as a state agency, I think, is communicating to the voters that, you know, we don't want to see what happened in the primary happen this time around. In the primary, we really saw the coronavirus go from being an abstract concept on, you know, say around March 7th or March 8th, to being an out-and-out crisis a week later. And, you know, if you look at the charts, the first COVID-19 death recorded in Illinois was on the day of our primary. We had, I think, 104 cases on March 17th in Illinois. Even, you know, we still didn't understand the scope of it. And it really rose, you know, you could watch the number of cases went straight up on those bar graphs on the day of the primary. You know, now we have some time. No voter should be panicked about having to put themselves at risk going into a polling place if they don't want to. So that's the messaging that we're trying to get out there, along with the idea that be a smart social media consumer. Although that once coronavirus hit, you know, the questions that I normally would have been answering from the national and statewide media about cybersecurity all went out the window, and it all became about coronavirus, voting by mail, and all that. So that sort of sums it up there. But all the local election authorities are going to be hearing from us, from me, when I start issuing some press releases to gin up some media attention to, you know, getting voters to get thinking now on how they're going to vote.
Great, Matt. Thank you very much for the state board's perspective, and we appreciate that. I'm glad you brought up that voting by mail in Illinois is safe. I do want to thank our state legislators, especially my good friend Representative Tim Butler, who made sure that our vote by mail in Illinois remained as safe as possible to avoid any possible fraudulent behavior. And let the media, I want to piggyback on a little bit of what you said, Matt, because our system here in Illinois is different than other states. We mail applications for people to vote by mail. So when you get that application in the mail, just like Mike Genesi in my home county said, I should be getting one. I don't have it yet, but I should. And if I prefer to vote by mail, get it done now. Send that application back so our local authorities can send that ballot to you, and you have time to drop it in the mail, get it back, and allow them to be able to process that ballot effectively. Now, some states, and this is where there's so much confusion, some states and localities, not here in Illinois, thankfully, they send live ballots instead of applications. That's a process that, in the case of my colleague, Barry Loudermilk, who serves on the House Administration Committee with me, his staffer in the Washington, D.C. area got 3 live ballots sent to 3 different names at his address. That is something that's ripe for fraud. That is where there are concerns. Rest assured, that is not Illinois' process. So understand that, and please do what you can if you plan on voting by mail to avoid the lines, avoid the polling places, or if you're fearful of the coronavirus, do it early and get that application in as quickly as possible. So thank you for that, Matt. Thank you, Angela, for everything you guys do to help our local election officials. Now we've got a few minutes left, and I want to give our county clerks a chance to ask questions of me and ask questions of Don Palmer. I do want to try one more time to start with Kathy Michael. Kathy is unmuted right now. Don't touch your mute button on the computer. If you are on the phone, just make sure your phone is not muted, and you should be live right now, Kathy Michael, McLean County Clerk. All right. I don't know what else to do, Kath. We still love you, and you're unmuted on our end. I don't know if it's a problem with your computer or the phone you're on, but get with me afterwards, and we'll make sure your concerns are heard. Any other county clerks want to ask a question of Commissioner Palmer or even of me? Feel free. Go ahead and unmute yourself or raise your hand in the chat feature, and we will go to you. Let's go ahead and start with Don Gray, who's raising his hand in the picture. Unmute all the county clerks, Nick Crocker, please.
And that's my fault, Congressman, not others. I got to figure out how to navigate this thing on my desk. I'm working off my phone. So, look, again, I want to stress, how grateful I am to have these discussions. Just listening to, the counterpart that I deal with often, Matt, from the State Board of Elections, you can see the challenges that we deal with. Sometimes theoretical based, resources that are very well intentioned can be quite challenging at the implementation stage. And, one of those, I'll explain briefly, and then I'll ask the question to it, is this concept of a school recruitment, right? The 16-year-olds that can serve as election judges. Very well intentioned, great resource, and we really love to have the additional capacity of those individuals assisting us, especially that are at a younger age, who are at a lower at-risk, exposure rate, when it comes to the COVID situation, to be able to serve as election judges. But what we found ourselves, at least here in Sangamon, in this unique environment, is that there's such uncertainty about schools, that schools administration and those that are in school and going to school are so fixated on just the concept of how's school going to operate for them. It's been hard to articulate a narrative that you can also do your civic duty and help us in an election when you're still in doubt about the uncertainty of what's going to develop in your education and what's it going to look like. So, we've had a difficult time working with our administrators locally in Sangamon County to get that word out that this is an option. We're only as good as the information that we can get out to the public, to what's available in their voting options, to what needs that we have, and how you can act upon those. And that's an example to, kind of the complexities of the challenges we're all dealing with on the different levels. So my question to the two of you that are obviously in a very prominent position of articulating, policy and the importance of elections, what additional avenues can you think for us to better message and educate the public on what opportunities are available to them to cast their ballots securely, and how we can recruit individuals to be a part of the civic responsibility or assistance to the election, because it takes people to perform these functions on election day, and we could really use it. Yeah.
Great. Don Palmer, go ahead, buddy.
Sure. I think that a couple of things you bring up, Don. One, I'd like to get some feedback from you all, but I think obviously in recruiting poll workers, it really takes an entire county government or city government to try to fill some of those gaps from a recruitment perspective. I know that the communication to voters is key, because having served as an overseas military voter, you have to be very aware of those deadlines and limitations sometimes of the post office. And so you have to start early. You have to get that request in. You have to get that ballot. And you got to make sure that you're doing it with enough time for it to get back to the system within the standards that they provide. And so I think that we're almost all Americans now are overseas voters, because we're dealing with an environment that many may vote by mail. And this may be the first time they've ever done that. And they just need to be aware of, as the State Board of Elections put out, you need to prepare that process. You need to be aware that it may take some days to get that ballot to you, and then prepare for the return of that ballot, which could be over a week, to make sure you get that. One of the things I will raise, maybe there's some feedback, is a number of states, as election day had progressed, there are certain areas of the state that did not have enough poll workers. There was an agreement from the election authorities at the state and with the governor to allow the National Guard to serve as poll workers, and to supplement as an election worker or a poll worker. They would be on orders. They would be in civilian clothes. They would be a resident of that county or city. And it really did help a number of states supplement what could have been even more dramatic shortfalls in poll workers. And so there's a number of avenues to sort of make sure we have a minimal level of poll workers, to make sure we can serve the public. And that seemed to be one that a number of states have employed in the primaries. And it may be an option moving forward to help supplement in November.
Well, thank you, Don, for your responses. Don, great, thanks for the question. I mean, this is the reason why we introduced the EASE Act. That's why we were trying to incentivize young people to become active on election day. And now, as you mentioned earlier, the need to become active before election day to help with mail-in voting processes. So these are, we need to incentivize young people to get engaged. Obviously, civic duty is not enough for us to fulfill our need for poll workers, especially during a pandemic. And what I don't want are forced polling place closures unless there's an emergency like Mike Genesi had to go through during the primary. This is something that forced closures of polling places will cause longer lines, to be the antithesis of what we need to do during a pandemic to have a polling place for the 59% of Americans that want to still vote in person. So passing the EASE Act to incentivize young people by helping to pay down their student debt could also help us alleviate long-term even the shortage we have of poll workers. So Don Gray, thanks for your questions. I see Debbie Banghart popped on there too. Debbie, you got any questions or comments for the EAC or me?
Yeah, I tell you what, the biggest problem I have, and our judges, I think, they're coming in pretty good, that they'll actually set for this election. But right now, our county is seeing a dramatic increase in COVID-19. And as a matter of fact, I'm at home right now.
Oh, you're on quarantine.
Yeah, and
we get to do our office hours yesterday, and
yeah,
I got outside.
It's kind of crazy down here. You know, we have one employee with COVID, so basically our health department shut my entire office down. So we're trying to do as much work as we can behind the scenes. But my question is, what's going to happen if we continue on this uptick and one of the other girls, after we get back to work, comes down sick, and the health department closes our entire office down? How are we going to do early voting or anything for that matter? We've got a lot of stuff ready, but we still have a lot of preparation to do for this election. And right now, I'm not even allowed to step foot in my office, even at night or after hours or anything. So I just don't know what anybody can do about that. But I know in talking to our health department, she said, well, we'll address that when it happens. Like, well, I'd like to kind of plan ahead to know what I'm going to be up against.
Well, you know what, Debbie, those are great points. I know from my own experience sitting right here, quarantine is not a way that you can actually go and prepare for an election in your office. We know that courthouse is now shut down for, are you 2 weeks? Is it
2 weeks?
So you're shut down for 14 days from going in the office to do the preparations that Don and Mike and others had talked about. This is a legitimate concern. Another issue that we try to address in that CARES Act is $200 million to be able to give to election authorities like yourself to prepare for contingencies like this. Maybe you could have used the money, you could use the money to have an off-site, to have some employees do similar actions at a different location in case that location at the courthouse is a location that has to be quarantined closer to the election. That's why we want you to have the flexibility and the resources to be able to make that decision. But you bring up something that I don't think a lot of folks have thought of. Imagine, you know, how many registered voters do you have in Greene County, Debbie?
Approximately 9,000. But the offsite, you know, I can understand that, and we could actually manage that through our system, I think. But the problem is, if my employees are quarantined, I don't have, I mean, you have to know that system in order to be able to do like early voting and to even do the mail-in voting and all. And if I is quarantined, you know, none of us, we only have the one girl who's sick, and actually she's probably going to get to come back to work before we are. You know, once she gets, you know, because she's kind of symptom free right now. So within, I think the health department told me like 48 hours or whatever, then she gets retested, she can go back, but we can't. So, but what happens if, if all my employees are quarantined at home?
Yeah, those are legitimate concerns, which is why we want you to have the flexibility and the resources to think about those things. But that's something I think every county clerk on the call needs to think about. I mean, imagine you've got 9,000 registered voters in Greene County. Some of our counties have hundreds of thousands. And if they're running it through one office, that's something they may need to be thinking about right now. But Debbie, thanks for your comments, and I wish you the best during quarantine. It ain't fun, I can tell you, a weekend. So I know you're a little bit behind me, but good luck.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
thanks for everything you do down there, and keep everybody in line at the courthouse. Don Palmer, you got any follow-up comments on this? Because I want to kind of wrap up, and I told everybody I'd keep them an hour. We started a couple minutes late, and we're about up on that deadline. So Palmer, go ahead and offer any comments to Debbie, and then also any closing comments you want to make, and then we'll round this up. Is Don Palmer unmuted, guys?
Sure. Thank you. I just got unmuted. I think this is a perfect example of, dealing and administering elections and a natural disaster or like this is a pandemic. For example, in Florida, you may have a hurricane, and this just raises the importance of why, giving options to voters and having that flexibility is really the only way forward. We're all going to be facing this pandemic, and making sure we educate voters on their options and how they can exercise the vote so important. And so I know that it's the same in Illinois as it is around the country. It's really a testament to local election officials as they they've got to overcome these challenges. And now we just need to educate the public so they're aware of their options to the best of their ability on what they can do to make sure they can vote.
Well, that's exactly what we need to do. And again, I do want to thank all of our county clerks. I know it's a busy time, as Debbie just reiterated. It is a very busy time for them. Thank you for taking the time today. Sorry for any technical difficulties we might have had, especially with one. Kathy, we'll set up a call with you and me, and I want to hear from you too. So that'll be coming in the future. I do want to thank our State Board of Elections and Director Sandvoss and his team, Angela and Matt, who are with us today. Thank you for what you do to make sure that our local election officials have the resources and the cybersecurity protections that they need to be able to run an election coming up this fall. So with that, I do want to thank everybody for being on the line. I am going to tell the media to please stay on the line. I'm happy to do, we're going to be happy to answer any questions in the we that I mentioned is me, Commissioner Palmer, and also our EAC Advisory Board Representative, Sangamon County Clerk Don Gray. Us three will stay on the line to answer any of your questions. You're welcome to stay on the line if you want to listen to those. Otherwise, you're welcome to drop off. And I do want to say thank you again on behalf of the Republican members of the House Administration Committee and the Democratic members of the House Administration Committee. Today's roundtable has been very informative, and we appreciate you taking the time to help us help you in Washington, D.C. So with that, this roundtable is ended, and we'll unmute the media. Nick will go ahead and explain how we're going to go about doing this Q&A, and happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Ranking Member Davis. So for folks who have questions, media that have questions for Mr. Davis or Mr. Palmer or Mr. Gray, if you can please try and utilize the raise hand function. So if you're not familiar, if you click up on the three little dots at the top, there should be an option to raise hand. Otherwise, you can just if you want to just raise your hand, if you're on the screen, that'll work as well. If you want to put into the chat, if you have a question and you want to put it in the chat, I can, okay. we'll just
Wait,
start.
wait, wait. Who's the guy with glasses raising his hand the whole time?
Yep,
I've never met-
Nicholas Balasay. You should be able to unmute now. There you go.
All
Thank
right,
you so
Nicholas,
much.
let's go to Bernie Schoenberg after that. Hey,
Yes.
Nicholas.
Hey, Congressman, thanks so much for taking the question.
Yeah,
It was a great discussion. You guys touched upon a lot of issues that are happening not just in Illinois, but nationally. So I wanted to ask you about the automatic ballots that are going out in Nevada and California. What kind of problems do you foresee that causing in the election, particularly in Nevada, which is always, at least in recent elections, a tight race? And I also wanted to ask you to elaborate on what you heard from Congressman Loudermilk about getting multiple ballots at his home address, and kind of what that looks like nationally if states like California and Nevada are sending out these ballots automatically with possibly outdated voter rolls. Thanks.
Nicholas, thanks for your question. Did I interrupt you? Go ahead, bud.
Nope, that's it. Thank you.
It wasn't Barry Loudermilk that got 3 ballots. It was one of his staffers. And I would urge you to go to Representative Loudermilk's social media site where he posted pictures of those ballots. So you can kind of get an idea of what his staffer got in the mail. 3 different ballots, I believe, under 3 different names in one local jurisdiction. What I'm reading about Nevada concerns me greatly. I have been reading that somebody can return 5 ballots in one envelope without signatures. That's something that is ripe for fraud. Look, political operatives should not determine how ballots get to and from a voter to a polling place. That's exactly what was corrupted in North Carolina's 9th district by a Republican operative in the 2018 election. As a matter of fact, we didn't seat that duly elected member of Congress, and we had a special election that elected someone else. And because of that, I am very adamantly opposed to political operatives using a process called ballot harvesting to go and get live ballots that may have been mailed to every voter in a jurisdiction and hopefully return them to the polling place. It's a process that has already been ripe with fraud. It's one that unfortunately, if that individual who's likely to go to jail in North Carolina because it's illegal there, if he would have done that in California, nobody would have batted an eye because it's legal. The process is legal. My team has put together a ballot harvesting report. We talked about just from observation of folks who were on this call who were observing the presidential primary in California. They document in that report numerous instances of concerns that we laid out. I'd urge you to go look at that. Many jurisdictions have been discouraged by Democrats in Washington from cleaning their voter rolls and doing voter roll updates. I have sat through hearings with many of my Democratic colleagues who have chastised election officials in states like Ohio for doing what the law requires them to do to update their voter rolls. That's something that if you mail live ballots out to individuals who are not supposed to be registered to vote at that residence, it creates an opportunity for people to commit fraud. And we've seen it in Paterson, New Jersey in their most recent primary. We saw it in Evansville, Indiana in the most recent primary. So there are instances of people breaking the law when it comes to mailing live ballots. That's something I've opposed from the get-go, and I'll continue to oppose. So go check out Mr. Loudermilk's social media site, and you'll get a better idea of what his staffer got. And you can reach out to him for any details, okay? Thank you. Bernie?
Unmuted now. Thanks, Congressman, and I hope it seems like you're feeling okay. I'm glad about that. I'm going to try to combine a couple things. You mentioned the EASE Act, the Democrats had the HEROES Act. Senator Durbin later today is going to be complaining about underfunding of the post office and worrying that there were $25 billion in the HEROES Act, which I know is the Democratic version of which you said you don't want because of what's in it. But in order to get ballots to the polling place or to the election authorities in time. So is there no way for, and of course you, as you know, are in the minority. So if you have an EASE Act and they have a HEROES Act, is there any chance for compromise? Do you think the mail service needs any more? And only because I want to try to get most of my questions out, is there any stimulus for the state of Illinois coming? Because Finke wanted me to ask.
Okay, well, Bernie, thanks for your questions. First off, the HEROES Act passed months ago, and even the most liberal media outlets in Washington said it had zero chance of becoming law. It was a $3.4 trillion wish list. And frankly, as I said in the media before when it passed, a $3.4 trillion package is bound to have some good things in it. But they actually squandered the great bipartisan agreements that we had in the CARES Act in the months of March and April. And it allowed everybody to retreat to their partisan corners. And now we're seeing the end result of that. So to answer your question, absolutely there's room for compromise. I certainly would like to see somebody in the Senate, like Senator Durbin, take up the EASE Act, which is specifically related to elections. It's not even part of a big package. It's a package that I think is a very common sense approach to get hundreds of millions of dollars to our local election authorities to help them do what they need to do to have safe and effective in-person voting, which 59% of Americans still want to do. It would also help incentivize young people to get engaged long-term into being poll workers by helping to pay down their student debt. These are things, and we would also include hundreds of millions of dollars to help localities clean their voter rolls so that if we have to go to a more robust vote by mail system, that they know that those ballots or those applications, as the case in Illinois, are going to voters who are affirmatively registered at the address that they're supposed to vote at. So I certainly would urge Senator Durbin and all of my colleagues in the Senate to take a look at this common sense approach. He's a member of leadership. He's in the room during many of these negotiations. I certainly hope he takes these good ideas into consideration when he's sitting around the table. Now, you mentioned the Postal Service. I'm for making sure that we do everything we can to fully fund our Postal Service. As a matter of fact, I'm a co-sponsor of a bill that would stop holding the Postal Service to a different pension obligation than any other quasi-government agency in the nation. So I'm effectively a big cheerleader of what the post office does, and frankly, am a big cheerleader of getting these absentee applications out as early as possible in Illinois so that those who want to take advantage of voting by mail here in my district can do so. So I think that we need to do what we can to encourage the Postal Service, which is why I, as a Republican, get endorsed by many of the postal unions.
Okay, what about state money for states? Are you still opposed to that, given that most states?
I've never been opposed to states getting money. I don't know where that comes from, Bernie. I've said if we're going to have that as part of the solution, I don't trust that the governor and the state will actually distribute those funds as effectively as they need to. As a matter of fact, an Inspector General report clearly stated that 83% of the CARES Act dollars that we have already appropriated in the $2 trillion worth of packages that we put together on a bipartisan basis have not been spent by the state of Illinois. So I've said clearly on numerous occasions that if there is local and state tax revenue assistance, that we need to directly give it to localities from the federal government because it's not being done as we intended. And as some of my Democratic colleagues reminded our governor on calls that I've been on months ago with them and him, that our intention was to get those dollars directly to our local communities that are under the population amount of 500,000 people. Who's next?
Okay, guys, we're gonna Cole with Center Square, and then we'll go to Zach with Politico, and then Dave with WTAX next.
All right, thanks, Bernie.
Thank you.
Yeah, hey, Congressman, can you hear me all right?
I can, Cole.
Sorry about the video. My 5-year-old is in virtual learning in a room behind me, and I've learned that kindergarten and Congressman Zooms do not coexist. So apologies for that.
Well, my question, like kindergarten and what you think?
It was funny. She had to tell the teacher to unmute herself. So there's a tech learning curve there for everybody. It's been interesting. Anyway,
That's
I'll
smart, everybody.
won't waste time. The question's actually for the elections officials. Is in other states with robust mail-in voting processes that have had it for a number of years, decades even, they have often seen elections result in close races not only not decided on the day or day after the election, but weeks after. Is this something that Illinoisans need to be, do they need to have their expectations tempered in terms of when they'll know when some of these statewide races decided? Because even county races in places like Arizona, they didn't know Joe Arpaio had lost in one county until Friday after the election. With 102 counties in Illinois, is it going to be weeks to know if a ballot referendum passed?
So, certainly, from the local perspective, we're doing a lot of talking about that. The better that we're informing the public to, what to expect and what to transpire, as we see an increased amount of vote by mail is just kind of a critical component to it. I'm spending a tremendous amount of time encouraging people that, one, if you want to be a part of voting by mail, make that request of us earlier so we can properly prepare, because in Illinois, we've not seen, this form of kind of expanded opportunity or heightened focus on vote by mail before in the past. Local election authorities don't have crystal balls. We work off of course stats of what's right in front of us. So we want to know what we're dealing with, what we have to prepare for an effective, smooth operation of a vote by mail program. And you're absolutely right. Voters need to know that the prompt return of that ballot is really critical, so that we can properly do our jobs of validating those ballots and having them prepared in tabulation for a result the evening of the election. And we're working daily, diligently, analyzing internally, in different scenarios of levels of vote by mail, what it takes us to accomplish that goal, to providing for a result at close of polls at 7:00 p.m. Those ballots in Illinois, you have the option that if a ballot is postmarked the day of the election, that returns will be added to them the 14th day after. We've had experience levels with that, with very close elections, that they came down to just a handful of vote by mail ballots that we're waiting for. So it's not an unknown to our constituencies. It could just be at a higher level than what we've seen before. So if they've waited before for close elections because of that very provision that we got in Illinois, they'll wait again. But again, we're diligently analyzing, putting in resources in the plans that any ballot that's qualified and validated to be tabulated in advance of the election will be done so, and you'll have results when polls close November 3rd.
Thanks.
Great.
Anyone
Who's
else?
next?
All right, Zach.
Hey, Zach.
Hey, Congressman. Glad you're halfway through the quarantine. I have a question both for you and Mr. Gray. I believe Matt from the State Board kind of alluded to this. He said that received a letter from the USPS General Counsel, and I talked yesterday with Secretary Wyman out in Washington State, and she said that it raised a major concern that the letter said that effectively discouraged election officials from using the bulk mail rate and to use first-class mail. So is there any concern that kind of making that switch, that using first-class mail for election mail versus bulk rate mailing could be a pretty significant unbudgeted for cost that election administrators just can't bear right now?
Yeah, and that's part of the problem of so much encouragement of trying to encourage just a national vote by mail program. Kim Wyman in the state of Washington has told me personally numerous times, it took them years to fully implement a vote by mail system. So I would trust Kim's going to know what the best process is in a state like Washington State, which votes completely by mail. But she has even told me that it would take upwards of 5 years for any state to try and implement what she does and what they do effectively. So what may work in Washington State may be completely different than what could work here in the state of Illinois. And that's why I think the post office sent out a letter to at least make people think about some of the processes that their states are following and how it may be impacted by the Postal Service's policies and procedures too.
Yeah, and I would concur with the congressman. Look, when you have, when you're dealing with, rewrites of election laws to accommodate for an uncertainty of an environment, and sometimes when those discussions are rushed, you have a bit of this disconnect between implementation and what's reality. So, I appreciate the acknowledgement of the Postal Service. It shows an engagement of working together to find solutions and delivery methods that are fully disclosive and transparent to our constituencies, to those that are voting by mail. Our responsibility at the local level is to, put that word out. Let the public know that have ballots in hand, what those recommended standards are of the Postal Service, and do our best to abide by them and abide by Illinois law and find the working medium between the two to get those qualified, valid ballots back. In terms of the postage rate, Sangamon County has always done the first class mail, but every little dollar matters, in this environment that's different in what we're preparing for. So, what's being recommended is going to be articulated. We're going to abide by it, and we're going to continue to be flexible in our thinking, to provide for the resources to get ballots back.
Great.
Thank you, Don.
Thanks, Congressman.
Okay, so Dave can't ask his question. His mic's not working, so I'm going to ask it for him. He's asked me to do my best Dave Dahl voice, but I don't think I could do it justice. So why is VBM so politicized? Why would VBM skew to a particular party?
I don't know why it's so politicized, other than the fact that it's pretty tough to explain the differences between the vote by mail program in Illinois, for example, and what national Democrats have been pushing in Washington, D.C. In 180 characters on Twitter. So really what we've been focusing on is fighting against mailing live ballots. That is what Democrats in the House have been trying to do on 4 different occasions, is to implement a vote by mail program followed up with nationalization of ballot harvesting, which I've already mentioned has been ripe with fraud already in states like North Carolina. And at the same time, we're trying to educate voters here in my home state that voting by mail is safe because our system is much different than what has been planned in Washington, D.C. So it's roundtables like this, Dave, that I think give us an opportunity to explain why there are concerns with a nationalized vote by mail program, and at the same time, why systems like Illinois' system is working, and it mitigates the risk for fraud much more than other states, and what national Democrats in the House have been pushing. And tell Clifford I said hi, David. I know you can't chat with me, but we'll chat again soon when I get done with this quarantine.